This is Between the Lines. Today, we dissect the road less traveled.
Hello, we continue with The Road Less Traveled, chapter 37, The Baby and the Bath Water. And in the last 3 chapters, we have been talking about the clinical cases the doctor mentioned in order to illustrate how God could, or the belief in God and religion, could influence somehow into the mental state of people, we could say. And those cases were put by the doctor in these chapters in order to answer the question, is belief in God a form of psychopathology? So are we somehow mentally ill if we believe in God? Could be the other question. And here he says, sometimes, as we have already seen in the cases, in the practical cases, the clinical cases, for example, in the case of Kathy, her fanatic or dogmatic belief in God was a problem for her, was some kind of pathology, we could say, pathology. But on the other hand, in the case of Marcia and Ted, the answer is no. Actually, they started growing and maturing themselves and started, in some cases again, or sometimes for the first time, believing in God. So what's the answer? And we have been talking about scientists before in science, and should we take a scientific approach in order to get to an answer for that question? And here the name of the chapter, if you can see, you can say why the doctors call this chapter The Baby and the Bath Water. And it's due to a metaphor, an idiomatic expression that, according to Wikipedia, the actual expression is don't throw the baby out with the bath water. And this means that when you are trying to get some value out of things, you shouldn't totally discard the whole situation, or you shouldn't totally get rid of the things that you may need to have into account when discussing a certain topic. So that is why this expression has been used here. And in chapter 33, if you remember, we have talked about the relation of science. And if we were to approach this through a scientific point of view, we have already talked a little bit about that. But sometimes science can be turned into a religion. We have discussed that, so I will not get into that much already. You can go and watch that chapter. And the thing is that we sometimes try to address this topic objectively, quote unquote. And is this objectivity really needed in this practice? I mean, in the practice of growing up or growing ourselves mentally or spiritually, as the doctor calls it here. Should we be objective, yes or no? And the doctor says, okay, we can address that from a scientific point of view, but the problem is that we could also see science as a religion again. And the problem with that is that two things happen, or science fails, we could say, in two different ways. And the one that we are going to address in this chapter is the first one. And he says, science can fail by throwing out the baby with the water. I mean, by discarding everything regarding God, we can turn into a dogmatic person and a fanatical one, but in the opposite way. Or we could embrace God and religion and everything, as has happened in the past, completely, forgetting that it has also brought this fanaticism with people, and things like Inquisition and crusades and all those kind of wars and movements, and bad things have happened in humanity, and hate due to a religion. And so that happened because of fanaticism, which is the same as throwing out the baby with the water, as he says. That is because the belief of God has turned into a dogma or into fanaticism again. That is one case of failure, the one that we will be discussing right now. And the other one is tunnel vision. We will be in the next episode, in the next chapter. And tunnel vision is basically when we completely separate from this idea of God, and we say, no, God should be banished completely. And that is also another way of being a fanatic, or that's the opposite dogma, we could say. So regarding to the first one, the first trap, or the first way that science fails us, I mean, trying to analyze this, should we stick with God or shouldn't we stick with God, or should we say, should we be agnostics or atheists, or what is that we should do regarding that? Well, actually, according, if we see the three cases that happened before, we said there are different responses, yes or no, sometimes depending on the case. So that doesn't actually give us an answer. There's no right answer apparently. And Mate? That is when people turn to what's the science. I've heard people saying I am a scientist, or I have a scientist approach. What is actually not exactly that, but they are more of an agnostic or atheist or skeptical, plain skeptical, or sometimes cynical regarding the belief of God. And that could also be sometimes that is seen as I am above all these problems of God, of these ideas of God. I'm in a higher position because I don't believe in God. But it also turns to be super dogmatic and fanatics. They tend to be fanatics, or fanatics, as I've seen in some cases with even with friends and people that I frequently see. And even in my case, sometimes I've gone through different stages, and so I don't have a real answer right now, but it was really interesting reading this from the doctor. So what can we do? Because the doctor also says here, if we were to analyze what should be the position of God, we don't have a monolithic religion or a unified religion where everybody in the world thinks God is this and we should believe this and this and this. On the contrary, there are too many religions, and there are also different levels of belief. So and even inside the same religion, some people can be a total fanatical, and other could be less of that, or could even not care, but that they are like registered in certain religions. For example, here in Argentina, it's typical for you to be for people to be registered as Catholics, and they don't actually practice anything about the religion. So there are different understandings and practices and things that people do regarding religion. Some others are fanatics, some others don't even care about that. So it's difficult really to come to a conclusion so far regarding this, But yes, we can say, and actually the doctor mentions here in psychotherapy, that even many therapists who are from a certain line of the practice, for example, of Freudian people, or the ones that follow this Freudian tradition, we could say, they are kind of skeptical about God, and they think the belief of God is pathological. But if you ask, for example, a Jungian person, they do tend, the doctor actually doesn't mention anything about Jung here. Don't know why, but he tends to have this idea of God and transcendence, and he has like more of he has a different approach of things. I wouldn't name specifically, but he thinks about transcendence and even a little bit more oriental in his way of thinking. So it depends on the therapist you go to, also the ideas they have and how they have been educated and how they have processed also themselves the studies they have done at university. So it will depend on the professional, really. But according to the doctor, he thinks, or he thought at the time, that not to be objective, because he thought that therapies shouldn't be completely objective, as we have also mentioned in some chapters before, that he said, as a therapist, you have also to get involved with your patients, but you have to measure when or when not to act as a god. Remember that he said that, and give your opinion, and to discern when your patient would be benefited from your perspective, your honesty regarding a certain topic, and when not, and when it was the patient's responsibility to get that from himself or herself. So far there's no right answer in this case. It could be frustrating if you have this scientific point of view or craving for knowledge. You want to know what is the exact thing that can, or method that can help you understand if God is necessary or not. But it is much more complex than that. And so even though we are not, I mean, I am not a therapist, you might not be a therapist, or maybe you are, or if you are as a patient, or if you are whoever you are, you need to find on your own how you want to, or with the help of a therapist, how to become a more sophisticated thinker, and how to mature and understand God or spirituality, and how or to what extent these ideas can help you or cannot help you in some cases. So that's my point of view from this, because it was like in a point I can understand it's kind of frustrating, saying, okay, but I don't know what to think, and at the same time it's not anyone's but you the responsible of getting to an answer or non-answer. You could approach it, for example, with curiosity, and maybe there's no answer at all, and there will never be. I don't know. So I would like to know what you think about this. I don't have a concrete response from this. Maybe if you read this chapter and you have been reading the book and been collecting all your thoughts, you could have a different approach. But anyways, we will wait for next Sunday to see what does this tunnel vision is about, this failing of science as a tunnel vision and what it implies regarding this topic. And by the way, that is the last chapter before the next section, which will be grace. So I'm looking forward to that and hope that it's useful somehow for you. And if you want to comment, it's much more appreciated. And thank you. See you next Sunday. Bye-bye.
Stay tuned for Ulua's next episode.